Hey guys, so I'm back with another video, and in this video we are going to create a .NET MAUI Blazor hybrid app, and we'll see how can we pass data from .NET MAUI's ML content pages to Blazor's pages and components, and how can we pass data from the other way around from Blazor components to .NET MAUI pages, and how can we share a state between these two models. So let's get started. For this, I'm going to create a .NET MAUI Blazor app. Let's create it. So I have created this project using Visual Studio 2022 and .NET 7. So if you look in the Solution Explorer, we have these www root, data, pages. All these are coming from Blazor. Then we have platform resources. These are from .NET MAUI. And then the shared is also a part of Blazor. Imports.razor from Blazor, app.xml, mainpage.xml and MAUI program. All these are coming from our .NET MAUI app. And if you look in .NET MAUI program.cs, we can see Blazor services add MAUI Blazor web view. So using this, we can kind of inject Blazor inside .NET MAUI. So if we go to the main page, here we can see we have this Blazor web view, this control, and host page is www root index.html, which is here, and in this we have this root component, which is this main, which coming from local is main only. So this main.razor. So this is the main entry point for our Blazor app, and from main we are setting main layout. So layout is coming from this file, and the default page would be this index page. So now let me run it on Android. I have this app running in Android emulator, and if you could see, we can see this Blazor template. So if you are familiar with Blazor, then you would be familiar with this template also. So this is Blazor starting template. We can click the counter, it is increasing, and we can use this fetch data component. So it is fetching data using HTTP request. So all this. Now we are going to split this screen basically in two parts, one for this Blazor and the second half for our .NET MAUI controls. So for that, let's go to main page.xml where we have our Blazor web view. So on this one, let's have a grid. Let's have two rows in this, row definitions and half half, and this Blazor web view, this is going to be the first row. So grid.row 0, and for second let's use vertical stack layout, grid.row 1. So what we are going to do, we are going to have the same. Okay, should we clear? No, let's not clear this. So this counter. So we are going to mimic this counter in .NET MAUI, this vertical stack layout. So let's do this. Before that, let me have it in running state so we can see it live. So now if you see this part, this purple or blue, whatever color is it, this part is from this vertical stack layout. So in this, first let's go to counter. So we are going to kind of replicate this layout, this counter, current count 0, click me, all these things. So for this, let's add a label, and for this label let's have text as counter. Okay, and before that have let's have a background color of white on this vertical stack layout. So background color white, and then we need to change the text color of this label to, let's say, black, and we can see it on this vertical stack layout. Let's add a margin from top. So left 0, top 5, right 0, and bottom 0. Fine. Counter. Okay, but before that, let's add one more label which says .NET MAUI vertical stack layout. And for this also we need to change the text color to black, or maybe let's go to app.xaml page, and if we'll see here the label, we are setting labels text color to primary text color, and this is coming from here. So instead of white, let's set it black here only, and we should be good now. Let me rerun the app. Okay, the app is here, and now we don't need these text color blacks because it will come from main settings. Okay, for this heading, let's change the font size to something like 16, and horizontal options, let's set it to center, and let's make it bold. Font attributes bold, and we are good, I think. Counter. Okay, after that, for this counter, but before this counter, let's have a margin from this label, margin bottom. So we'll have 0 from three sides, and from bottom let's have something like 20 or 25. Okay, 25. And then for this counter, let's change the font size to something like 18, and font attributes bold. So this counter, let's add a padding also to this vertical stack layout. Let's add padding, or maybe, yeah, let's add padding of 15. Fine. And then after this counter, we'll have this current count, this thing. So let's have a horizontal stack layout with first item as this current count text and the second item as this value. So for this, let's have this horizontal stack layout. It will have two labels. So first is current count, and then second one for some text, this count number, current count, and after that we have this button. So after this, let's have a button with the text click me, and on this button let's change some things. First, text color as white. Okay, then horizontal options, start. Fine. So I think we are good, but let's add spacing between these two. So for that we can go to vertical stack layout, and we can add a spacing of 10 or 15. 15 is okay. Fine. So we have all these things now. Let's change this click me to increase counter from XAML. Fine. And if we have done that, let's change this click me, this Blazor components click me to same increase counter from maybe Blazor counter. It is coming from this pages counter, and we have this current count, and we have this click me button. So let's change it to increase counter from Blazor. Okay, so it is working as expected, but for this to work, increase counter from XAML, let's go to main pages code behind. Let's have a property here for this counter and counter. Yeah. So for get, let's return it, but for setting, so we are not using, we could use community toolkit, but for now, for notifying the changes, so if we go to the in the hierarchy of this content page, it is actually implementing element bindable object. It is actually implementing this I notify property changed, and it has this on property changing and on property changed method. So let's go here, and when we are setting this value, at that time after setting we would call that on property changed event, and so it will notify UI to re-render this thing for this counter. Okay, next thing we need to set binding context for this page, so this is going to be this only, and if we go to XAML, instead of this hard coded 10, now we will get it from bindings, this counter. So let's restart the app is here. So if we move to counter, now if we click on this, it is incrementing Blazor's counter, and if we use this and this is not working, what is the issue? Increase counter from XAML. Oh, my bad, I have not added event for this, so let's use pressed event, and for this button pressed, and if you go here, we will simply increment this counter. Let me rerun. Okay, app is here, and now this is working, and if we check Blazor's counter, it is working. So both of these are independent right now, right? If we are increasing this counter, it has its own counter, and this Blazor component, it has its own counter. Now next thing, we are going to use a shared counter. We are going to implement a mechanism so that we can have this counter from a shared location. So if we increase that counter from Blazor, it will increment it for both the places, and the same will go from this button. If we increase it from here, it will increase the both of these. So for that, first thing, let's stop this app. We can have it inside. Let me create a folder here, and let's call it states. You could name it whatever you want. For this, I am going to call it, let's say, counter state, because I'm manipulating only single value. So let's change it to public, and let's have a property here for the counter, or maybe let's copy it from here. On property changed, we are going to implement our own notify property changed. Let's implement this, implement interface property changed. We are going to invoke this with sender as this only, and property changed event arguments like this, name of counter. Fine. So because I'm using only single property, this counter, that's why I named it counter state. You could have multiple properties here, you could have this multiple properties shared state basically, so you could name it as per your requirement. For me this looks fine, so save it. And now we need to use this counter state from both of these places, this counter.razor and then main page.xaml.cs, main page.xaml basically. So for this we need to register it inside our IOC container. So let's register it here. So we'll say builder.services. We could have singleton instance because we want this state to be shared across the application. So counter state, now we can inject this counter state in both of these parts. So let's inject this first in counter.razor. So we'll say inject counter state and let's call it counter state only. And now instead of this current count, we will use counter state dot counter property. And when we are, so now we don't need this. And now when we are incrementing this count, we will going to increment this method. Okay, let's have it expression body like this. And the same thing, we need to inject this inside main page.xaml. So we need to inject this. Let's inject counter state. Let's have a variable here. Now we don't need this private underscore counter and we don't need this thing because we are going to use the property from this counter state. So we have this underscore counter state and for button pressed we will use this only. Next thing is binding context this. So we are not setting binding context to this because now we have our view model. So we will set it to this underscore counter state. Now let's go to its code behind here. Instead of this counter, no, this counter, the property name would be counter only, but now it will come from this counter state. So for that, let's add namespace. We are going to add our data type for this. So before data type, it will come from our namespace. So let's add namespace. Let's call it states, and we will have this from this states. And now we can have our data type for this counter state. Now we can have this in our IntelliSense. So this is fine, this is coming from here, but now there is one problem, this main page. So for this main page we are actually creating its instance from our app. So we need to pass that here. In order to use that, we need to inject that in this app. Let me add usings, and we don't need a property here, so we can directly pass this. But as we are injecting something to app, we need to register this app as well. So let's go here, let's add singleton for this app as well. So now we are injecting this, go to main page, we are using this, and it will always going to pass the same instance because we are using singleton registration. So for this counter also we will get the same instance. Now for this counter.razor, it automatically re-renders whenever there is any change in this component's state. But now if you look for this counter state, this is not component's state, and when we are incrementing the counter, it is actually using this property change invoke. It is being modified from this external part for this Blazor component. So for that we need to explicitly tell that something has changed, you need to re-render the component. For this, that we will override on initialized, and here we can say that counter state dot property changed, and we can have sender and event arguments. We would say state has changed. So if you are familiar with Blazor, you would know that by calling the state has changed, we are saying that something has changed, you need to re-render this component, so it will re-render this. But now if we are attaching some event handler, and if we are moving away from this counter, this Blazor component, then there will be a memory leak, so we need to deregister it, we need to remove this event handler. So for that we will be using a disposable pattern. So let's call implements iDisposable. So we are saying that this component implements iDisposable, and for that we are going to add our dispose method, and in dispose we are going to do the opposite of this, but we need to deregister it. For that, let's create a helper method, private void, let's say on counter changed, and the signature for this are going to have this thing. So we'll have this, and from here we will call the same thing, state has changed. And from here we will simply add this on counter changed, and let's copy it, and on dispose we would remove this. So everything is in place now. Let's try to run this. It's running now, and if you go to counter is incrementing. Now if you look, we are incrementing counter from Blazor components, increase counter from Blazor 17, 18, 19, and at the same time this .NET MAUI vertical stack layout, this counter is also increasing, right? 20, 21, I'm doing it from here. And if I increment this from this .NET MAUI vertical stack layout, I'm incrementing this. I made it, let's say 40, and at the same time if we look in Blazor component, the first half of the screen, the current count is 40. That means both of these are using the same count. Let me zoom it a little bit, and yeah, from this one Blazor it is 55 now, and here also it is 55, and if I increment it from here, it is 65 now, and it is 65 here also. So this thing is working, and let's try one more thing. I'm not on that page. Now I'm on home page in Blazor, and now let me change it to, let's say 80. And if I go back to counter component, we can see the current count is 80 here. So all these things are working now. So using this approach, you could make a shared state which can be reused, which can be manipulated from our .NET MAUI pages, content pages, and at the same time from Blazor pages and Blazor components. And you can share state between these, manipulate, retrieve, fetch. So all of those things you could do like this, and you can have multiple states. Maybe you can have a large state for complete application, or maybe you can have feature wise states. You need to register and you need to reuse those. That's all you need to do. Now let's go to counter, and let's do some designing. So before this we have this counter, and let's have one h3. Let's have it Blazor component, and if I save it, it will be reflected here. So hot reload also works for this. It is using bootstrap, so let's move it to the center. And if I save it, and it is fine. And let's add a padding from bottom only 4. Save. Okay, so I'll make just tiny adjustments to this UI, and I'm going to change this. Let's change this. So this header part, this must be coming from our layout, main layout, nav menu. From nav menu, we have this thing, right? Right. So for this, we can simply change this heading. So let's add a spacing, MAUI Blazor hybrid shared state. So this thing, fine. So this is done. What we wanted to achieve, we achieved that. Now I'm going to push this code to GitHub, and I'm going to add the GitHub's link into my description so you can check the source code from there. And like this video, if you like my content, share this video and subscribe my channel for more such content. And I'll be back with another video.